Have you ever had the feeling that no matter how hard you try to stay firm in the faith, something seems to drag you away? Maybe you faced difficulties, but that was not what shook you the most. It was something else, something more subtle. Someone entered your life, initially appearing trustworthy, but gradually began to erode your emotional strength. The enemy knows that if he cannot hit you directly, he finds another way, quieter, but equally destructive. He sends people who are manipulative, cunning, and disguised as friends, partners, or even spiritual mentors. They do not attack with overt hateful words, but with sweet words that carry a hidden poison. It all starts almost imperceptibly. There is a comment that masquerades as a concern in one place, and a criticism that appears constructive in another. Gradually, you feel confused, as if you can no longer trust your thoughts. This person convinces you that your doubts are just a lack of faith and that your attempts to protect yourself are signs of selfishness. This is one of the enemy's most dangerous strategies. He uses people to attack his emotions and distorts his view of God. He makes you think that your faith is insufficient, that your prayers are worthless, and that God himself has turned away from you. But here's the truth the enemy doesn't want you to know. God is seeing every detail of this manipulation, and at the right time, he exposes the lies and reveals the truth. When this happens, the manipulator loses the control he thought he had. Spiritual manipulation is a silent attack, but not inescapable. When these signs appear, God is already at work, and this is the first sign of something bigger. Some individuals enter your life with gentle words and a welcoming presence. But over time, that sweetness turns into something suffocating, a manipulation so subtle that you barely realize you're being controlled. This is how the enemy acts when they can't attack you directly. He sends people who manipulate not only his emotions, but also his faith. The narcissist doesn't have to attack you openly. He acts sneakily, casting doubt at strategic moments. It can start with innocent questions that make you question things that once seemed clear. "Are you sure God really cares about you?" he suggests, as if he's just sharing a reflection. Or you may say, "If God really was helping you, why is nothing going right?" These are words that, at first glance, seem harmless, but which slowly weaken your confidence. The manipulator may even present himself as spiritual, quoting verses out of context to justify his manipulation. He twists the gospel message to make you believe that you must endure abuse in the name of patience or forgiveness. This tactic creates a dangerous cycle where you begin to doubt God's own voice and trust the words of that manipulator more. The enemy is cunning. He doesn't have to push you out of God's presence. Just plant small seeds of doubt so that you slowly drift away on your own. That's the real trap, when your faith starts to feel like a burden and the idea of drawing closer to God becomes tiresome or discouraging. The narcissist doesn't just destroy your self-esteem, it undermines your trust in God. It makes you feel unworthy, insufficient, and unable to hear the Father's voice. Confusion settles in your mind, and you start to wonder if your spiritual life has any value. But there is something that the manipulator cannot prevent. The truth always finds a way to emerge. When you begin to realize that this emotional and spiritual cycle is taking you away from God, it is because He is already at work. Recognizing that this manipulation is actually a spiritual attack is the first step to breaking this cycle. God has not called you to live enslaved by doubt or paralyzed by manipulation. He has called you to a life of freedom and peace. And that liberation begins when you see that the real enemy is not just the person who manipulates you, but the spirit that tries to use that manipulation to take you away from the divine plan for your life. When you understand this, the cycle begins to lose momentum, and the light of truth becomes more and more evident. God is already at work, even if you can't see it yet. Before we continue, write in the comments, God is my fortress against manipulation. Share this message to reach more people and subscribe to the channel to receive more inspiring reflections. Spiritual manipulation rarely begins in an evident way. Instead of direct attacks, it slowly infiltrates, confusing your perception of reality and undermining your faith in an almost imperceptible way. And as you try to make sense of what's going on, you may find yourself stuck in a cycle of guilt, insecurity, and loneliness. This manipulation, often carried out by a narcissist, follows clear patterns, and recognizing them is essential to break this cycle. One of the most common signs is constant confusion. The manipulator creates an atmosphere where you begin to doubt yourself. Issues that once seemed simple become sources of anguish. Decisions that you once made with confidence now appear risky or incorrect. This confusion is intentional. It's a way of making you feel like you can't trust your judgment and that you need the manipulator's guidance. Another clear sign is the feeling of unjustified guilt. The manipulator, adept at reversing circumstances, instills in you a sense of responsibility for issues you did not initiate. If you defend yourself against an unfair accusation, he accuses you of being insensitive or of not practicing forgiveness. If you try to set a healthy boundary, he manipulates the situation to make you feel like you're being selfish. This guilt, which has no basis in truth, is designed to keep you emotionally trapped. Gradual isolation is another dangerous strategy. The narcissist knows that surrounded by people who love you and who guide you based on the truth, your manipulation loses strength. Therefore, he tries to keep you away from friends, family, or anyone who can strengthen you emotionally and spiritually. This phenomenon can occur in a subtle way, with frequent criticism about people close to you or with mean comments that plant doubts in your mind. "I just want the best for you," he says, as he convinces you that no one really cares about you anymore. Another worrying sign is attacks disguised as advice. The manipulator uses seemingly kind words to mask his intentions. He may claim that he is only trying to help you, but in reality, each advice hides an attempt at emotional control. Phrases like, "I'm just trying to protect you," or "I'm just worried about you," are manipulative when they carry veiled criticism or an attempt to undermine your confidence. These signs, although small and barely noticeable at first, accumulate over time. They drain your energy, undermine your self-esteem, and weaken your faith. Gradually, you start to feel emotionally exhausted, like you're always in debt, always wrong, and constantly trying to fix something you can't understand. This is the trap that the enemy builds, using manipulators as tools. He knows that turning you from God's truth will make you more vulnerable to more destructive attacks. This is why these tactics are so dangerous. They undermine your emotional well-being and weaken your connection to God. But there is something that the manipulator cannot control: God's action in your life. When you begin to notice these signs and identify that this cycle is not just an emotional issue, but a spiritual attempt to move you away from the truth, you are already closer to liberation. God will not allow this manipulation to imprison you forever. He reveals the truth at the right time, and when he does, the confusion is dispelled and peace returns to his heart. Recognizing these patterns is the first step to breaking free from this cycle. And when you allow God to conduct this process, every lie loses its force, and every doubt is replaced by the assurance that he is in control. Relating to a narcissist isn't just a draining emotional experience. It's a spiritual battle that undermines your faith and weakens you from within. While the emotional and psychological damage is obvious, the spiritual impact is even greater because it affects your relationship with God and distorts your beliefs. The narcissist acts in a subtle way, using his words and attitudes to corrupt his perception of his spirituality. He doesn't have to directly attack your faith, just sow doubt and manipulate situations so that you start questioning whether God is really listening to your prayers. At first, it may just be a comment disguised as a concern. "You've been praying so much, but nothing changes," he says, suggesting that his faith is useless. Over time, these words become a constant. When you face difficulties, the manipulator insinuates that it is your fault. Maybe you're not praying right. Maybe God is disappointed in you. These phrases, although seemingly simple, carry a devastating emotional charge. They make you feel that your faith is not enough, that your prayers are worthless, and that perhaps God has abandoned you. Spiritual manipulation also manifests itself when the narcissist twists Scripture to justify their abusive behavior. He may quote verses out of context to make you believe that you must endure humiliation and abuse as a sign of love and patience. The narcissist manipulates Christian principles to stay in control, exploiting their goodness and sincere desire to act on Christ's teachings. This distortion creates a devastating cycle. You feel tired, emotionally drained, and spiritually distant. Your faith, which was once a source of peace and security, becomes a burden that seems impossible to carry. Praying becomes difficult. Reading the Bible seems useless. Your mind becomes burdened with doubts that did not exist before. The spiritual impact is even more dangerous because it messes with the basis of your identity. The narcissist convinces you that you are not worthy of God's love and that your flaws are too significant to forgive. This manipulation traps you in a spiral of guilt, shame, and hopelessness. But that's not the truth God has for you. The enemy tries to use the narcissist to distort your faith because he knows that if he can pull you away from God's presence, he weakens you. However, this manipulation has limits, and God will not allow you to remain trapped in this trap forever. When you decide to surrender this battle to the Lord, something powerful happens. God starts revealing the falsehoods ingrained in your mind. The manipulator's words lose force and are replaced by the truth that you are loved, cared for, and protected by a God who does not abandon you. This transformation doesn't just happen around you, but within you. God restores your peace, strengthens your faith, and reminds you that you are not responsible for the destructive choices of those who manipulated you. He shows you that trusting Him is not weakness, it is wisdom. He never ignored his prayers, and their faith was never in vain. When you hand over that battle to God, He interrupts the destructive cycle that the narcissist attempted to impose. He reveals the truth, brings justice at the right time, and restores your soul to the security that only He can provide. You don't have to carry this burden alone. What seemed like a spiritual defeat becomes an opportunity for God to show that even in the quietest battles, He remains in control, acting to set you free and restore all that has been stolen. God's justice doesn't always happen when or how we want. It's inevitable and relentless. A narcissist who undermines your faith and manipulates your mind may seem to always get away with it, but God sees everything. And at the right time, He reveals the truth clearly and powerfully. This exposure does not always occur quickly. God, in His wisdom, often allows the manipulator to continue acting for a while. This is not due to His disregard for the victim's suffering, but rather because He has a more significant purpose in mind. This is not due to His disregard for the victim's suffering. God reveals the manipulator's behavior and fortifies those who have suffered during this process. The initial indications of God's intervention often manifest in the manipulator, who previously exuded confidence and security, now falters in his words, stumble over his words. Their lies, which once seemed convincing, are beginning to contradict each other. Small details that he previously manipulated no longer fit. This is a clear indication of the emergence of truth, as manipulation necessitates complete control, which God, through His exact justice, gradually undermines. Another clear indication is the dissolution of the facade. The narcissist, who used to present himself as someone charismatic, wise, or loving, begins to show his true nature. Those who were previously blind to his manipulative behavior begin to notice inconsistencies in his words and actions. People who used to defend the manipulator now turn away because their lies can no longer hold up. This loss of control is one of the most revealing moments of God's action. The manipulator, who once seemed to control every situation and always find a way to do well, begins to lose control. Desperate attempts to manipulate other people fail. Justifications that once seemed convincing are beginning to sound hollow and contradictory. It's as if the doors he kept closed begin to open, and the truth, which he tried so hard to hide, begins to come to light. This process can be slow and even frustrating, but it is at this time that God strengthens. As the manipulator attempts to uphold his facade, God is shaping you spiritually and morally. God works within you, restoring your peace and preparing your heart to live with emotional and spiritual freedom. When God decides to expose the manipulator, there's no lie that can stand. No matter how much he has manipulated situations or distorted truths, divine intervention is precise and irresistible. God doesn't just reveal the truth, He does it in a way that everyone can see, and this revelation cannot be denied. This not only does this justice reveal evil, but it also provides protection and restoration for those who have suffered. The truth is revealed. You don't just free yourself from manipulation, you rediscover your identity, your peace, and the assurance that God has always been by your side. As much as it may seem that the manipulator is always in control, this illusion does not last forever. God is already at work, even if you don't see it clearly yet. At the right time, He will bring everything to light, and the truth will become impossible to deny. That is the unwavering promise of a God who never falters, exposes. He doesn't just reveal the manipulator, He restores those who trusted Him during battle. And this restoration is the greatest testimony to God's power and faithfulness. Seeing the manipulation being exposed brings a sense of relief, as if a giant weight had been lifted from your shoulders. However, despite its importance, this revelation does not instantly heal the emotional scars that remain behind. True healing begins when you surrender your pain to God and let Him restore your identity and what was lost. You are who you are. The first step to this restoration is to accept that the cycle is a stager. The restoration phase can be one of the most difficult phases because, even after the manipulator has been exposed, it is common for you to still feel doubts, insecurities, or even a sense of responsibility for events. The narcissist, with his emotional control tactics, may have convinced you for a long time that it was all his fault. And this feeling may persist even after he has left your life. If you do, you must recognize this manipulation as a lie. Understanding that the cycle is over means freeing yourself from the belief that you need to fix something that wasn't your responsibility. What you experienced was unfair, and trying to go back or understand every detail will not erase this reality. Accepting that this chapter has closed is accepting that the end of this chapter takes courage and faith, trusting that God has something new for you. The second step is to allow God to heal your wounds. Emotional wounds are not visible, but their effects can be devastating. They manifest themselves in the form of fears that you can't explain, the difficulty of trusting other people, or the constant feeling that something bad is always about to happen. These internal marks don't just fade over time, they need to be addressed. God doesn't just know these wounds, He has the power to heal them. When you surrender that pain to Him, you are inviting the greatest restorer there is to work within you. It not only erases the scars of the past, but it empowers you so that this experience does not define who you are. The pain that once paralyzed you becomes a testimony to how God lifted you up, sustained you, and led you to a future of peace and security. This healing is not limited to your emotions, it is also spiritual. And it is in this process that you must take an essential step, rebuilding your spiritual identity. The narcissist has tried to distort the way you see yourself, convincing you that you are weak, unworthy, or incapable of moving forward. But that was just another lie. God wants you to see yourself again as He has always seen you, someone loved, protected, and guided by His hands. He hasn't just healed you, He's shaping you to live with a new inner security, with the assurance that your life is not in the hands of manipulators or oppressors, but in the hands of the one who has never stopped caring for you. Rebuilding that identity means learning to see yourself as someone valuable. The key is to realize that God's unconditional love defines you, not your suffering. This process can take time, and that's okay. Spiritual healing is not always immediate, but it is complete. God works every detail of your heart to make you not only God works everywhere in your heart, to make you feel better, stronger, wiser, and more confident in Him. Pio. Over time, you will discover an even more powerful restoration of what the manipulator attempted to destroy. His seemingly shaken faith becomes even firmer. Self-esteem, which has been eroded, is rebuilt on the basis of divine truth. With the knowledge that God guided you, even when you didn't realize it, you no longer feel lost. This restoration isn't just a return to what you were before. It's a breakthrough into something even greater. Because God doesn't just give back what was stolen, He transforms your life in a way that reveals His power and love in an extraordinary way. What seemed to be an incurable wound becomes a living testimony of God's faithfulness. He doesn't just expose manipulation. He lifts you above the lies and leads you to a life of peace and purpose. Divine justice is more than the downfall of the manipulator. It is the resurrection of your hope and your identity as a beloved child of God. Breaking free from a manipulative relationship is a significant victory, but the real safety lies in learning how to prevent this cycle from repeating itself. Narcissists and manipulators take advantage of emotional and spiritual vulnerabilities, which is why it is essential to strengthen yourself to recognize these pitfalls before they involve you again. God has not only delivered you from this situation, He also wants to enable you to walk safely and in balance. The first step is to avoid. The first step to avoiding further manipulation is to strengthen your identity with Christ. Who you are before God, your perception of yourself changes. Instead of seeing yourself as insecure or dependent on the approval of others, you come to recognize that you are loved, valuable, and protected by Him. This spiritual conviction is a powerful barrier against manipulators because they cannot dominate a person who has a firm identity. The narcissist usually exploits insecurities and doubts to control you. He manipulates your emotions by making you feel insufficient or dependent on him to feel accepted. But when you know that you are a child of God, this manipulation loses strength. When you understand that your worth comes from what God says about you, and not from the twisted words of someone manipulative, you become much more resistant to the enemy's tactics. Another essential aspect of avoiding further manipulation is to pray for discernment. Manipulators often mask their real intentions, initially presenting themselves as trustworthy and charming people. They know how to earn your trust so that they can later exert emotional control. But God is the one who sees what is hidden and reveals hidden intentions. When you seek discernment through prayer, He gives you the spiritual sensitivity to notice when something is not right. What once seemed like just an uncomfortable feeling can become a clearer warning that someone is trying to manipulate or control you. The Holy Spirit guides and strengthens you, protecting your heart and mind. In addition, it is essential to learn how to say no safely. For many people of faith, denying something or walking away from a toxic relationship can feel like a lack of love or compassion. However, learning to set boundaries is a wise and necessary move to protect your emotional and spiritual health. The manipulator takes advantage of people who have difficulties in imposing limits. He exploits your kindness and your desire to maintain peace as a tool to exert control over you. It is not an act of selfishness, but rather an act of protection. Jesus, in his walk on earth, demonstrated this steadfastness by turning away from people who tried to distort his mission or manipulate his wisdom. Knowing when to shut up, walk away, and confront should inspire you. It would be an inspiration to you. Learning to say no safely involves trusting that God approves of your decision to protect what He has entrusted to you, your peace, your faith, and your emotional health. This firm stance does not mean being rude or insensitive, but rather being committed to what is right before God. Avoiding new cycles of manipulation isn't just about identifying manipulators, it's about becoming a stronger, wiser, and safer person on the path God has prepared for you. When you recognize your worth, pray for discernment, and set healthy boundaries, you don't just protect yourself from further manipulation, you live in freedom and peace. God doesn't just set you free, He equips you to live wisely, knowing that you no longer have to fear the traps that once trapped you. This security allows you to move forward with confidence, knowing that the same God who rescued you is the one who empowers you to live a fuller and more protected life. Forgiving a manipulator, especially. It can seem almost impossible to forgive a manipulator, especially one who has undermined your faith and emotionally hurt you. Experience often leaves deep scars that are difficult to erase. However, forgiveness isn't a favor you do for the manipulator, it's a gift you give yourself. It is the key that breaks the chains that still try to bind you to the past. To forgive is to surrender your pain to God. Resentment is like a wound that, if left untreated, remains open and bleeding. Holding a grudge or constantly reliving the manipulator's words and actions keeps you hooked on what you most want to overcome. When you forgive, you're not saying what happened was right. You're just letting this pain go. Have control over you. Surrendering your pain to God means trusting that He is able to heal those wounds completely and definitively. When you say, "Lord, this pain is too great for me to carry alone," you invite the greatest restorer there is to work within you. God doesn't just understand the depth of your pain. He specializes in turning scars into testimonies of healing. To forgive is to trust that divine justice is sufficient. One of the greatest difficulties in forgiving is the fear that injustice will go unpunished. The manipulator may have lied, humiliated, and hurt you, so it may seem unfair to let it go. Being what happened, it means trusting that God is just and that He will handle it far more powerfully and completely than you ever could. God is not indifferent to what you have experienced. He saw every manipulative word, every attempt to undermine your faith, and every action that tried to bring you down. When you forgive, you're saying, "I put this cause in the Lord's hands." And when God decides to act, His justice is perfect and unquestionable. To forgive is to break any emotional influence the narcissist may still have on you. The manipulator may already be far away from your life, but if you still carry resentment, they continue to exert power over you, even from a distance. Forgiveness breaks that connection. It prevents the manipulator from still taking up space in your mind and stealing your peace. This doesn't mean forgetting or forgiving an individual for what happened or allowing that person to hurt you again. To forgive is to free your heart from accumulated pain so that this experience no longer defines you. Forgiveness does not erase what happened, but it prevents those memories from continuing to imprison you. The pain you experienced was part of your journey, but it doesn't have to define your future. When you forgive, you are saying that you will no longer let this experience control your life. God calls you to live in peace. And that peace is only possible when you choose to let go emotionally, surrendering that pain into His hands. Forgiveness is not a sign of weakness, but of strength. It is the courageous decision not to allow the past to dictate your present or limit your future. And when you choose to forgive, you are making room for God's true healing to fill every part of your heart. God's justice does not always happen in the time we expect, but when it manifests itself, it is powerful and definitive. The manipulator who seemed to always be in control, the lies that confused his mind, and the wounds that seemed incurable, all of these are brought to light when God decides to. Not only does He reveal the truth, but He also restores those who have placed their trust in Him, even when everything seems hopeless. He now becomes a part of a larger story. What was once pain and anguish becomes part of a larger story, a story of redemption, and God rectifies past wrongs and transforms those experiences into opportunities for growth and maturity. What the manipulator tried to destroy, God restores with even more force. His faith, which was once the target of ridicule and questioning, becomes a living testimony to the power of God. People who have doubted your perseverance will see that it is your trust in Him that has sustained you. What seemed like a defeat turns into proof that divine justice is relentless and undeniable. God doesn't just deliver you from the manipulator, He empowers you so that this experience doesn't define your life. He transforms His tears into wisdom, His suffering into empathy, and His story into a living example of unwavering faith. Victory is not just in the downfall of the manipulator, but in your ability to move forward with peace, security, and trust in the perfect plan God has for you. Thank you. See you in the next video.